if you have any kind of timepiece upon you, you'll notice it is 7 o'clock on the dot. I will tell you that at 6:59, Bobby said to me, we should be starting. I said, it's okay. We'll be fine. So I am Charlie Kyle. I'm the principal of Innis College, and I welcome you all here for this wonderful event, the launch of 1 Minute More by Robert Rotenberg. And I will begin by, after welcoming you, by reading the land acknowledgement. So, there we go. We wish to acknowledge this land upon which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work and to celebrate on this land. And typically when I deliver the land acknowledgement, I like to take an extra moment to ask people just to reflect on the spirit of what is contained in these words, because the land acknowledgement that we do at U of T is the same one across all events, and it's easy to just sort of let these words wash over you and not really think about what they mean. But what I often like to tell people is that we could not be here were it not for the land this building is sitting on. So if you think about the centrality of the land to your enjoyment of this event tonight, that may give you the sense of a kind of indebtedness we have to the Indigenous people who were responsible for being keepers of this land in the first place. So it's my privilege to introduce to you, by virtue of biographical information in the first instance, and then you'll see in the second instance, our two stars of tonight. So I will first introduce our moderator, Bob Ramsay. And I will say that Bob had quite the illustrious series of accomplishments that, were I to read them all, I think Bobby would then be going, are you aware it's 7:05? So I will not go to that length. I will simply say this. Bob Ramsay was born in Edmonton, Alberta, and graduated from Princeton with a BA in English and from Harvard with a diploma in publishing, to which I will parenthetically add, show off. He has been a speechwriter for Ontario Premier Bill Davis, again, show off, and for countless CEOs and corporate leaders. And he contributes opinion pieces on diversity, the arts, and bicycling for the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, and Maclean's. Since the pandemic, he has written a blog called Ramsay Writes. For 40 years, he has also organized the speaker series Ramsay Talks, you may see a pattern there, which presents some of the leading figures of the age, from Jodi Kantor and Neil Ferguson to Eric Schmidt, Sanjay Gupta, Mark Carney, remember that name, Manoush Shafiq, and Susan Rice. He also teaches writing and persuasion to large financial institutions, a Canadian pension fund and its global offices, an international architecture firm, a world-renowned medical research and care facility, none of these are being named, several not-for-profits, and a large performing arts group. I should also add, this is not on the bio I was given, but I also understand that he's also a published author, a book called Love or Die Trying. So he knows what of he speaks when he shares the stage with our, I guess I can say, main attraction. Now, Bobby, modest person that he is, said, I do not want you talking about me, and his bio was like, he's written a few books. It was like, not even worth wasting air on. So instead, if you remember what happened last year, we are going to test your knowledge of Rotenberg Arcana by asking you this question, and then you can put up your hand if you know the answer. And I said, we should do this again. I think it worked quite well last year. And he said, I don't have any swag. So last year we gave out swag bags to people who got the answers right. And first of all, I'm thinking, why not? But that was never answered. So instead, I think he's made a much more generous gesture. He will read, is it any chapter? Yeah. Any chapter of the new novel? Yeah. Of the new novel to the winner. Or if you're like, well, I already read it, so I don't need it read to me, anyone else of your choosing. So for example, if you may have an elderly parent who would like to be read to, and who wouldn't want to be read to by Bobby. So the point is, that is what you are gunning for when you put up your hand to answer the question. So don't shout out the answer because you'll invalidate your ability to be the victor with each of these. So just wait, put up your hand if you know, and then do you want to choose the person who puts up the hand? Do you want me to do it? I won't know the people, so it's probably fairer if I do it. Okay, so here's the first question. I think this is an easy one. Okay, on Monday night for the last 40 years, Bobby has played which sport? Should I exclude front row people, or is that okay? Because there was somebody here who had a hand up really fast. Okay, we'll go with you because you were. It won't always be the first person, but you were very eager in your. Hockey. Okay. So you both gave it, so I don't know if you both get to be read to at the same time. Okay. So, and I will just add that Bobby wrote to me when he gave me the answer was, my goal in life to have on my gravestone is it for it to say he was a better than average Jewish hockey player. Okay. So, Bobby has 3 university degrees. So you must name all 3. So can anyone figure out what those 3 were? This is the home of the first one. So there's your. Okay. Well. Oh, was that you like a gesture, or you don't really have an answer? No. Oh. Okay. All right. So wait. So if I were to give you. Yes, a hint. Okay, one is the obvious one, like the standard one upon which one builds. The second one is the one that would align with a profession. And then the third is a master's that might also. Like, I practically told you the answer. Come on, people. Where's a hand besides these 2 people in the front row? Yes, go for it.
BA English, LLB, and I presume master's in English?
No. Masters of. Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Yes. Yes. It's a BA from here, U of T, and from Innis specifically. And then, yes, the LLB from Osgood, and then the LLM from the LSE. There you go. And Bobby added here where Trudeau went, but I don't think he graduated. Okay. Now here is a tough one. How many of these should we have to answer? Well, there's 4. The question is name 3 settings, but do we want to reduce it to 2 or okay? Name 2 settings in any of Bobby's novels that are not Toronto. So think of any setting in any of the books that are not. I can't ask you again. Now, people are going to the one in their hands like. Yes.
I guess London and Vermont.
That would be neither. But they were guesses.
Vermont.
Does Vermont count? Yeah. Okay, so you got 1. Do you want to guess? Where? Paris. No. You're in the right continent. Okay, we'll go back to. Sorry, we'll go back. Maybe Bobby will read you a paragraph. Yeah. Yeah.
Italy.
Okay. Yeah, but you can't piggyback on his other one. You can't use Vermont from him. You got to come up with 2 of your own. Yeah, he said Italy, but that's 1.
A small town in Ontario.
Yes. Now, is this spelled right? Yeah. Do you know where to go look for birds? Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Halliburton and Point Village. All right. Point Village. Yeah. Okay. All right. You want to, yeah. Well, I think you should kind of read all 3 of them at once, like have them all sit in a room because collectively they got it. Okay. All right. Now here's the last one, and this one has a kind of a tie-in. This is like going to be my promotional pitch for Bobby's career. As well as writing his novels, Bobby has co-written 2 episodes for what TV show? Oh, you want to try again? Okay, of course. Yeah. All right. And that, do you want me to make the announcement, or do you want to do it? Okay. He is about to sign an option for the film and TV rights to his novels. We're all very happy about that. And at this point, yeah, second round of applause. And at this point, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Lisa Ray, who is a publicist with Simon & Schuster and is, I think, Bobby's publicist for his novels, and she is going to take up the next part of this.
Thank you so much. All right, good afternoon, everybody. As you know, my job is to pitch Robert and his books and convince you to read everything that he writes. So hopefully you'll find this as convincing as I usually am in my everyday job. It's a pleasure to be here celebrating 1 Minute More by the brilliant Robert Rotenberg tonight. And my name is Lisa Ray. I am a book publicist at Simon & Schuster Canada, and I have the joy of working with incredible storytellers, but none more so than Robert, who has been captivating readers for years with gripping thrillers, all while expertly balancing the scales of justice, both in the courtroom and on the page. Honestly, I'm not sure which is more stressful for him, defending clients or facing book deadlines. Robert's books pull us into a world with razor-sharp authenticity, suspense, and characters so compelling you almost forget to breathe. 1 Minute More is no exception. It's an absolute page-turner, perfectly paired with 80s nostalgia. So for those of you who miss mixtapes, shoulder pads, and a world without push notifications, this book is for you. A big thank you to Innis College, and in particular, Shayla Anderson. Also, a huge thanks to our bookseller tonight, Ben McNally of Ben McNally Books. And if you haven't bought a copy of the book yet, just a reminder that your neighbor needs one. Your mother needs one because Mother Day and spring is just around the corner. And let's be honest, books make the best gifts because unlike socks, no one ever fakes enthusiasm for a great thriller. Also a reminder of our silent auction tonight. We are hosting tonight where the winner will be winning their name in one of Robert's upcoming books, and you can find more details about that silent auction out on the signing table. And of course, thank you to Bob Ramsay for joining us tonight for what is going to be an unforgettable conversation. And finally, thank you, Robert, for being the reason that we're all here tonight. He is the most tireless, game for anything author a publicist could ask for. So without further ado, please join me in a round of applause for best-selling author Robert Rotenberg.
Everybody. Is this on?
This on.
Yeah. Very quickly to start off, I'm very fortunate my great friend Robert Charner suggested before my last book that I should get Davin Bajowski to do a video and tell you what the books are all about. So for the first few minutes, unfortunately I have to see myself on the screen, but this will be, I'm going to cue this, hopefully we'll just see the short video. It can tell you a lot about the book. Is this going to work? I think it is. Hi, Robert Rotenberg here, and excited to introduce to you my 8th novel. I always wanted to be a writer, and even in high school, I was writing short stories. I once sent a short story to the New Yorker, which they sent a rejection letter, which I thought was pretty terrific. So recently I went back and looked at my box of early writing, and here they are, some of the earliest short stories, poems, diary entries, creative writing. So I was determined to be a novelist, but of course life doesn't always go in a straight line. After going to university, studying English, and taking a year off to try to write a novel, so I really didn't know what I wanted to do, I ended up in law school, determined to never be a lawyer. So 10 days after I was called to the bar, I got on a plane and I went to Paris. And in France, I was the managing editor of Passion magazine for about a year. Then I came home and I started my own magazine with one of my best friends called Tio Magazine, which we did for many, many years. And finally, I was in my mid-30s. Our first child was about to be born, and I was broke. So I went back to practice law. And the very first day, I went to Scarborough Provincial Court. If you're a criminal lawyer, in Toronto. You'll know what Scarborough Provincial Court was like. I drove home that day and I thought, I can't do just this for the rest of my life. And that day, I started my first novel. Now, it just so happened on July 4th, way back then, we ended up in a place called Stanhope, Quebec, Derby Line, Vermont. It's a famous town right on the border. And we were there for the July 4th parade. It was a wonderful, typical spectacle. And I had this idea, well, what if a female assassin was crossing the border on her way to kill the G7 leaders? Mulroney, Mitterrand, Reagan, Thatcher, they all came to Toronto in July of 1988. I knew it was a fantastic opening scene for a book that I want to write one day. So that day after court, I started my first book. Here you can see my 1988 old box. I gave it some terrible titles. Get the G7, Kill the G7. Finally, I came up with the title, Heart House. I never loved the title, but it was all I could think of. Why Heart House? It's a world-famous, spectacular building. It's the place where on the last day of the G7 meeting, on the patio in the outdoor famous quadrangle, all the world leaders met. There's an extraordinarily famous photo of that meeting that's in my book. But I had a personal connection. I lived in my second year at University of Toronto in Heart House. On the third floor, there were 3 little apartments, and I lived in the middle one, which looked right out onto the patio. I went to work, and it took me 10 years to write the manuscript. Yes, 10 years. I submitted it to a bunch of agents in New York. I found in here one of my submission letters, March 24th, 2023. I got an agent. She submitted to all the top publishers in New York. And again, I got rejection letters. But they were good rejection letters. They said they really liked the writing. The one chapter they loved was about a small town lawyer driving his beat up old Camaro to court. Then a writer friend of mine said, Bobby, you're making a mistake every new writer makes. You're writing and rewriting the same book. It's not a book, it's a career. Put it away, start your second book. I started my second novel. It took 10 years to write Old City Hall. I'm proud to say it was not just a bestseller, but it was an international success. We sold it in 9 countries. Since then, I've written 6 more novels. What to do next? That novel in the drawer, Heart House, I had this idea. What if I made it a prequel? My main character, Detective Ari Green, is a young cop back in 1988, and he's chasing the assassin all the way to Heart House. I was nervous. I pulled it out of the virtual drawer and sent it to my 2 main readers, Catherine MacDonald and Gloria Cassidy. I said, I know it's got a lot of flaws. Tell me if the pages turn. Yes, they said. Then I sent it to my in-house editor at Simon Schuster, Adriana Kerr. She said, Bobby, wow, couldn't put it down. The bath water got cold. So I did what I always do. I went back to work. Editing, cutting, adding, editing, cutting, adding. But what was I going to call this book? Well, my brilliant editor, Laurie Grassi, came up with the idea that instead of chapters, we should have countdown. 6.15 hours, 49 hours, all the way down to 46 hours, all the way down to the last minute. It was a great idea. And then the title popped into my head. And here it is. 1 minute more.
Can you all hear me? Terrific. Oh, Bobby, the bathwater went cold. That is a review of this book, and I would suggest that that is the best possible review of any book ever. The bathwater went cold. Yeah? Bobby's had other reviewers, Ian Rankin, the peerless mystery novelist. But it's interesting because Bobby's been writing books since 2009. That's when Old City Hall first came out. But it was a very different world of books then. 2009, there were book reviewers, there were book sections, there were bookstores. But what there wasn't was social media. Okay? So the entire landscape for books has changed. And so my question is, because you are looking at and you're hearing from one of the great book marketers of the world of his own books. So my question to you, Bobby, is what are you doing in this sort of crazy world where people will pay attention to your book for 1 minute more?
Good question. I've slowly but surely got more into social media, but more I think it's just the personal connection. So every time someone writes to me, I write back to them. I'm in connection with all sorts of bookstores. You know, Bob, when I started in 2009, well, first of all, I want to thank you. You probably don't remember, but the very first book event I ever did was at your house. Bob is the most generous man, and he phoned me, said, "You're going to come to my house? Everyone's going to give me $20. You're going to talk about your book?" I said, "Oh, my God." At the end of the night, he stuck all the money in my pocket. He said, "Go home, keep going." You probably don't remember that, but
No,
it was.
but that's
So I think a lot of it is just personal connections. And I remember when I first started, my publisher, Kevin Hansen, said, go to every book club, talk to every book person, because really still, despite all the social media, there's two things that are going to sell your books: word of mouth and quality books. You can do a huge amount of promotion, and if the book isn't very good, it's not going to go anywhere. And, you know, as a young writer, you think, all I want is to get one book on the shelf. And then after about a year, you walk in the bookstore and you think, Ian Rankin's got a whole shelf. I've only got one book. So now that I have 7, 8 books, I mean, I feel like I have a whole family for people to jump into and read, which is, I think that's the best promotion, is to just keep going.
great. And you're off to a good start tonight.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Yeah.
So you are a criminal lawyer and an author, and the world is filled with authors who used to be something else. So Jean Le Carré was a spy before he became a spy novelist. Beverly McLaughlin was a Supreme Court Chief Justice before she became a novelist. Arthur Conan Doyle was a doctor before he became a novelist. But that's not your story, because you are one of those very rare people who is not either or was then and isn't anymore. You are a criminal lawyer and you are a best-selling author. So how do you do both at obviously an incredibly high level of competence at the same time?
Well, I'm going to give you a double answer to that. W. Somerset Maugham, whose short stories I've been rediscovering, and who you told me you wanted to do your thesis on at Princeton, he said he spent 5 years as a doctor before he started writing. And he said that he learned everything he needed to know to be a writer about the human condition by being a physician. And I think he worked at a very poor area in London. And I meet people in my law practice at the worst moment in their lives. I mean, when you're coming to see a criminal lawyer, you're in crisis. And I get to see them and hopefully help them go through the Kubler-Ross 6 stages of grief. You know, shock, anger, denial, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And my late mother once said I'm more a social worker than a lawyer. And I'm proud to say in the last 15 years, I settled all but one of my cases. And I've done that by learning people's story and learning who they are and getting them to kind of understand their own story. And took me a long time to kind of realize that's the essence of writing characters too. And characters aren't just one-dimensional, but they're people who they were, who they become. And so this book, when I decided to write a prequel, I'd written 7 books about R.E. Green and Nora Baring, who's his friend, and then to go back and think of him years before who he was, it was very exciting because it's kind of like I got to recreate his backstory, which I kind of knew, but I've gotten to know a lot better. I've gotten to know him a lot better doing this.
So you
I'm
said,
not sure if I answered your question, but it was a good
sure,
answer.
but
So.
let me take you back to the question.
Yeah.
In the video, you said that you were broke, so you went back to criminal law. That's not true today. Today, you are basically. I guess my question is, why does a guy like you work 2 jobs?
Well, ask my son, my daughter. That's right. Well, first of all, it's very hard to give up on something that you've been doing for, I've now, despite not wanting to be a criminal lawyer, I've been a criminal lawyer for about 35 years, and I really help a lot of people. And it's very hard to just kind of walk away from that skill. I mean, all of you think of yourselves, like Liz, can you imagine stop doing art? I do think one feeds the other. Not trying to be overly modest. I don't think it's really so extraordinary because almost everyone here do many different things. You might work full time and be an amazing cook or gardener or whatever. It's just what I choose to do. So, and there are a number of writers who have been writers and work full time their whole lives. But when all of you buy 100 books and get another 500 people to buy 100 books, and then we do get this film made, and then I don't have to practice criminal law, then I'll probably write full time.
Right. Good.
But until then, yeah. And you know, I think if I had the whole day ahead of me to just write it, I'm not sure how that would feel. In fact, I think if I was doing that, I would probably be writing 2 books at the same time. I just heard from a publisher that's what Frederick Forsyth would do. He'd work on 2 books at the same time, or co-write. There's a musician, my friend Mladen, he and I just co-wrote a musical, so stuff like that.
Terrific.
Yeah.
So you are in mid-career with the R.E. Green franchise, and you've built this detective in these novels painstakingly over the years. And then your last book, suddenly you went someplace else.
Right.
And it wasn't an R.E. Green novel. And it's called What We Buried, and it is basically a Holocaust novel. And this new one is an R.E. Green novel, but it was written, as you heard, long ago. Okay? So I guess my question is, and lots of, and it's interesting that mystery writers mid-career break and they go and write different kinds of books. Sometimes they change their names when they write these different kinds of books. Sometimes they keep their names. So I guess my question is, was What We Buried a one-off, or are you going there? I guess my question is,
what is your question?
because we all love R.E. Green. I want you to keep giving us R.E. Green. Like, don't ever not give us R.E. Green.
Okay, and we've discussed this, you and I.
Yeah.
Ari's still there, but the joke was after, because I tried so hard not to write what they call a legal thriller, and then of course, I said I don't want to be called Canada's John Grisham, which now people call me Canada's John Grisham, but at some point I just didn't want to continue writing courtroom dramas. I loved writing courtroom dramas, but I didn't want to feel like I was writing the same book over and over again. And I'm really, like you, a history nerd. And so What We Buried, because I had this backstory, many of you know about Kennicott and what had happened to his brother. And being able to write about 1944 and taking my my characters and put them into historical settings was really exciting. And I've done that again in this book. And I don't want to give that up. So I kind of have two streams that I'm thinking of. First of all, this book ends in 1988, and the next book in the series, chronologically, is 2009. So Ari has many years to go around the world and do some really spectacular things. But I also want to continue the story of he and his progression. And I love writing about the city. Every book I write is Stray Bullets was about gun violence in the city. Downfall was about the homelessness in the city. So I want to do both, but I'm finding that not just writing a courtroom drama, but writing something that's tied to history, I think it adds a little bit more depth, and it's more challenging, and I really enjoy doing it. Yeah.
Great. Good. So, when you established Airy Green, it was interesting because it was based on in 2009, would have been a slightly quirky, sort of impossible character of a Jewish chief of homicide detectives. And it turns out that there was, Mark Mandelson, a Toronto Jewish chief of homicide detectives. And I just, because I love the story and I love Mark Mandelson because he is such a great character. Tell us more about him and his role in your books.
Well, there's actually a funny story with Mark Mendelsohn, because when I came up with the idea, when I was writing Old City Hall, I came up with the idea that this character was the only Jewish detective on a homicide squad.
Yep.
And then we got this very high-profile, quite famous murder. And Mark Mendelsohn was very involved. And so I said to my partner, and one of us had to go down to Jamaica for this case. So I did not want to see or meet Mark Mendelsohn. So I had my partner, Alvin Shidlowski, deal with him. And when he would come to the office, I would make sure, I didn't want to see, I didn't want to talk to him, I didn't want to be influenced by him in any way. So I didn't meet him for about 3 or 4 books, and now his office is in my office in Eddie Greenspan's old building. So, so it's kind of like fiction and fact and fiction. But I'll tell you a cute little thing. In the book, see, the writing about 1988 was so much fun because, I mean, one of the things in the book is that the chief detective is given this big, huge thing called the brick, which was the first phone. Remember the Michael Douglas movie? Everyone's nodding,
Right.
you know. That was the very first time in Wall Street that was in a movie. So, and one of the things that I'm finding, I'm not sure if any of you find, is that too many of these Netflix shows now, it's like this device. Oh, they went on the computer, or they did a search, or they text. So no one can do any of that in these books. So one of my favorite things in the book, when I rewrote it, was Detective Green is stuck on his bus going from the Quebec-Vermont border to Montreal, and he can't communicate with anyone for an hour and a half. And then he gets off in the bus station, and he realizes he doesn't have a quarter. So he has to go buy a chocolate bar so he can have a quarter to make a phone call. So I asked Mark Mendelsohn, I said, is that realistic? He said, we used to drive around with a bag of quarters so we can make phone calls. So in many ways, I just watched the Jackal TV series, which was interesting to watch because I kind of know the story very well. But to be candid, I was very disappointed at the very end when, like, the key thing, you're nodding, the detective, she goes online and she sees something on the computer. I think it's just too easy. It's too easy a device. So writing about 1988, like in the opening chapter, there's a telex, and he's at a hotel, and he says, I think they might have a fax machine. You know, it's really fun writing those things, and especially for people of our generation. But I think also as Lisa said, the 80s are kind of coming back. It was a simpler time, and yet the issues are the same. Also, when I wrote the book, I spent hours and hours in a reference library because, of course, there was no computers, and I would go down to the basement. And did you ever used to do that? The reference library, and
Yep.
you put the old newspapers in, and you have to whirl them around, and you get this horrible headache. But it's amazing reading about 1988. You know what the big fear in 1988 was? Free trade was going to come in, and we're going to disappear as a country, and we're going to be the 51st state.
Right.
Now,
Right.
go back and look at 1988.
Right.
So it seems to be very, very contemporary. You know.
Right. So, speaking of fear of becoming the 51st state, the Canadian-U.S. border these days is, of course, very fraught and very thick.
Right.
And it's interesting because I was talking to Bobby a few days ago, and in an effort to kind of stand up for Canada and Canada's place in the world, he said to me, you know, we need our own assassins. Why are all the best assassins from Europe? Like, what's wrong with us that we can't grow our own assassins? So talk to me about
Well,
how
it
that
occurred to me when we were talking the other day,
Yeah.
because Canadians write nice cozies,
Yeah.
we write mysteries, Murdoch mysteries, but to brag a bit, I think this is the first real high action thriller. So why does an assassin always have to be in Spain or Lithuania or
Right.
So I think I was interviewed the other day, CTV in Calgary, and they said, well, what about Calgary? I said, oh yeah, it'd be great to have an assassin out at the Stampede, and the interviewer's eyes lit up. But I'm being sarcastic, but I'm also not, because when I first started the books, people kept saying, well, why don't you set them in kind of nowheresville, United States, to get a bigger American audience? And I just, whether wisely or not, I've always been determined to write about Toronto and Canada and make it a real. So I'm gonna put in a 2-minute push for Crime Writers of Canada. We're really pushing for people to really think that you don't have to read American thrillers or American mysteries. You can buy Canadian books. So that's my pitch. Thanks for applauding.
Great. You obviously have a great lead character in your novels, but you have some wonderful minor characters.
Thanks.
And one of them is, am I right, is it the Crown or the lawyer from the small town with the loud car, the souped-up car? Talk to us a little bit about the role that minor characters play, obviously in the plot, but just in the reader's memory of, and how they define the whole book and the whole landscape.
Well, one really interesting thing about a difference between a thriller and a mystery, I always say the difference is, in a mystery, the detective or the protagonist is ahead of the reader. So you're reading it and kind of saying, oh, what's happening? And then, of course, the detective or whoever is smarter than the reader. But in a thriller, like in chapter 2, you meet the bad guy, who actually, if you look closely, it's the woman in the letters. But what I noticed when I started rewriting the book, I went and read 1 million thrillers. And I noticed that in my novels are very old-fashioned. Every chapter is from the point of view of one character. And there are usually 3 or 4 characters in the books. But in this book, there's a lot of minor characters who you only see for 1 or 2 chapters. And it's a lot of fun because through those characters, you can see the main character, but you can also tell a lot of the story. So I referred to that in the tape, the small-time lawyer who I'd written about, and I always loved that chapter. So about 23, 24 years later, when I opened the book again, I looked at what I wrote all those years ago, and then I looked at this again. Now, I don't like reading from my books, but I'm just going to read the first paragraph. Because I spent years going to small towns in Ontario, and in every small town in Ontario, there's always, and it's almost always a guy, not always, who was like the high school quarterback, whose parents and grandparents were local royalty, and who's on his 2nd or 3rd marriage, and driving a beat-up old car. So what was really exciting for me was to go back and see that this paragraph, which is page 109 if you read the book, and it's just a one-time character, was the exact same. And you're allowed to laugh when I read this, okay? Frank Osgood knew he was late for court, but fuck it. Judge Henry fucking Humphrey Jacobs and his dumb three names could wait to have his pernickety fat ass for a few more minutes. Too damn bad. Blame it on the bloody Essex County Judicial Committee. They're the ones who gave Jacobs the stupid judicial appointment that he should have had. And it goes from there. So it's really fun bringing in all these minor characters and kind of telling the story as the story goes from the border to Montreal to along the St. Lawrence to Toronto. You kind of tell the story through the eyes of minor characters, which I think it's really important, and I think it's really fun. Yeah.
Great. One last question, and then Bobby will go back and be available to sign books. So the last question, of course, is tell us about your next book. You are a guy who talked about writing 2 books at the same time. So tell us about your next book.
Well, I can tell you that Ari Green's father is not going to live forever, unfortunately. So that's the beginning of one book. There's also a character named Nancy Parrish, who some of you may know, and I may kind of divert to have her defend her father, who claims he was unjustly convicted many years ago. I'm also working on a series of Ari Green's father in what we call the DP, Displaced Persons Camp, in 1945, where there were 250,000 Jews stuck in Europe for 3 years. And then, of course, Ari might run around and save the world for the next 10 or 12 years. Can I tell one very, very quick story? And I don't want to keep anyone too long, but when I was writing the book all those years ago, we had very little money. We were raising our 3 amazing children, and I had this beat-up old computer. And we had a cottage that every once in a while I would go up to and write for a few days. And finally, one day, I actually wrote the last line of what was then Get the G7 or whatever horrible name I had for it, and I put -30-. You as an old journalist would know that's what you put when you finish a book. And I was so excited. And so I took the floppy disk out, and I put it on the, Peter, you'll remember, on the kitchen table, and I wrote a note. And I said, if I die on the driving home, this is my novel. So that was the world back then. Anyhow, listen, I'm very, very honored that you all came out. And I want to say one thing very quickly. 2 summers ago, I had the joy of reading Bob Ramsay's extraordinary book. Bob is really an incredible treasure and extremely frank, and his book about his life. Well, I knew Bob when he was the bon vivant of Toronto, when I was running the magazine, and his life and how it collapsed when he was 40 years old, and his recovery and his extraordinary life now. It's a great, great book, and some of them are for sale. So I really highly recommend it. It really made my summers 2 summers ago.
Thank you, Bobby. I must say it's hard to cut somebody off when they're talking about you, but that's fine. Anyway, thank you all for coming. Bobby Rotenberg, thank you so much, and there we go.
And finally, Innis College has been so extraordinarily generous twice in a row, and I really appreciate it. I'm very honored to be a graduate of the college.
Well, we're honored to have you as a graduate. So just a couple of things. Anybody who answered the questions correctly or sufficiently correctly that you're going to get read to, please make sure that Bobby knows your name so that he can contact you to do, I mean, in some cases, I don't think it's going to be a stretch for him to figure it out. But in other cases, if you don't know that he knows you, please come down and let him know that you're the one who answered correctly, so you'll get the... And then you're going to do a signing.
Yep.
out in the lobby, and that there will also be the opportunity during that time for you to participate in the silent auction and get your name into a future novel. And do you want to say anything more about the terms of that auction?
Well, whatever we can raise, I will match. Mark, who's here, Mark, you got your name in 2 books ago, and I'm sorry. Linda got her book in, although I didn't put her full name in, and I apologize. So Linda, I'll get your full name in next time. So it's a lot of fun. Mark said when he was reading the book, he didn't know all these things about himself. So, anyhow, I'm very keen to raise money for Innis in this beautiful.
We appreciate that. So 2 last things. If you already have a book in your possession, if you could hold it up, they'd like to take a photograph of those who. Good for all of you.
Oh, great. There you go.
And then.
Excellent. Thank you.
And I think we might have. Oh, thank you. It's so nice of you.
Oh, thank you very much. This is my friend Dr. K. I didn't expect this. Thank you, Jay. You're welcome. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you. Oh, I really don't want to keep people. One more thing. I've come up with a fun idea. People keep saying to me, my grandparents love your books. So and I got a photo of a 97-year-old reading my book the other day. So if you have any elder people in your life, please send me a photo or even a quick little video of them reading my books, because I want to do a promotion about the book for all ages. Thank you very much. That was great.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. This is gonna
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.